Hi, I'm Sarah Keogh and I'm dietitian with the Coeliac Society of Ireland. And I'm going to take you through this quick guide for people who are newly diagnosed with celiac disease. And this is really just to plug the gap between you learning that you have celiac disease and getting to see your dietitian to get your full detailed advice with it. So I'm going to take you through just some very top line things to be aware of with celiac disease and give you some tips on where to start. So what is celiac disease? So if you're new to this, it's just a quick explanation. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease that is triggered by eating gluten. Gluten is a type of protein that we find in a number of foods. Things like wheat and barley will have it. Celiac disease mainly causes damage to the gut. So if someone with celiac disease eats gluten, it damages the lining of the gut. And this means that nutrients are not absorbed properly and people can have lots of symptoms, and these can vary quite a bit from one person to the next. Not everybody will have gut symptoms. Sometimes people will have no gut symptoms, but the celiac disease can affect other parts of their body. People can have rashes, they can have problems with fertility, hair loss, can have problems with the nervous system like migraine, pins and needles in the fingers and toes, maybe a loss of balance. So there's lots of different things that celiac disease might do. And although you will always see gut damage with it, not everybody feels that or notices it. This is a more detailed look at some of the different symptoms that people see with celiac disease. So diarrhea, bloating, constipation, they'd be the most common things that we would see. Weight loss is there, but only about 13% of adults will actually have weight loss. Abdominal pain is very common, mouth ulcers, indigestion, anxiety. Boys and girls can be later going into puberty. Women can have earlier menopause. We often see short stature or slow growth. So if children have celiac disease as a child or during their teens, they might not have enough nutrition to grow to their full potential in terms of their height. We can see loss of tooth enamel. People get a lot more osteoporosis, anemia, low vitamin B12 or folate, reduced fertility, migraine, depression, and skin rash. So there's lots of things that can be caused by celiac disease. So how is celiac disease treated? At the moment, the only treatment for celiac disease is a strict gluten-free diet with an emphasis on strict. Even a very, very tiny amount of gluten, the amount that would fit on the very tip of a pin, is more than enough to cause gut damage in people with celiac disease. So it's quite a strict diet. And this is why it's very important to see a registered dietitian when you are diagnosed. A strict gluten-free diet can be a lot more difficult than you realize. And lots of people who don't see a dietitian do end up accidentally continuing to eat gluten. And then they don't get necessarily the same benefits and feel as good as they should after they're diagnosed. Your GP can refer you to a registered dietitian, or if you're diagnosed at the hospital, your consultant can refer you, or we do run a dietitian clinic at the Coeliac Society and you can book to see a dietitian there as well. People with celiac disease also need extra advice about certain nutrients, including vitamin D and calcium, and it's another reason why we need to see the dietitian. But also people with celiac disease can be temporarily lactose intolerant. They might have other issues. So it's important to get well checked out at the start so that you can make sure you're going to get the best benefit from your treatment. So what can you eat? So we have naturally gluten-free foods, and these are foods that naturally have no gluten in them, and they don't come into contact with gluten during processing or packaging. So these would be foods, for example, like chicken. If you buy chicken in the supermarket, once it has no sauces or anything on it, that's going to be gluten-free. Foods that are labeled gluten-free, they're absolutely safe for you to use as well. So these are foods that are specially made without gluten, like gluten-free bread, or they're foods that are specially made to make sure that they don't have any gluten in them from cross contact. So that's your gluten-free oats would be an example there. You can also use the food list from the Coeliac Society. And this is a list of foods where we talk to manufacturers, we find out what ingredients are in the food, and we also check to make sure that there's absolutely no chance of cross contact with other foods during processing. And this list can be really helpful because it has over 6,000 foods in it. So straight away, there's lots of foods that you can eat. But it also means that it's safe and you don't have to worry about cross contact in foods that you choose from this list. Naturally gluten-free foods include fresh meat, chicken, fish, and eggs, includes fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh herbs, plain unflavored milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, and cream, rice, potatoes, and polenta, pure oils like olive oil, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, honey, table sugar, and jam, and tea, coffee, and water. There's a broader list of naturally gluten-free foods in the front of your food list, so you can have a look for more detail there. What do I need to avoid? So we mentioned that gluten is found in things like wheat and barley. It's also found in rye, but it's also found in what we call ordinary oats. So oats do get absolutely covered in gluten when they're being harvested and processed, usually. So that means your ordinary oats that you'd buy or your ordinary porridge that you would buy generally has lots of gluten in it. So sometimes oats can be processed in a different way and kept very separate from gluten, and that's where you'll see gluten-free oats. So we need to avoid those foods. We also need to avoid any foods that have ingredients listed. So if they have wheat, rye, barley, or ordinary oats listed in ingredients, they're foods to avoid. So that would be ordinary bread, biscuits, crackers, pasta, and many breakfast cereals have barley malt in them. You also need to avoid any foods that say may contain. So if a pack says may contain wheat, may contain gluten, may contain barley, anything like that, you also need to avoid that. We do know that in those cases, those foods generally do contain gluten. You also need to avoid any foods that have touched these ingredients. So you might have a nice gluten-free muffin, but if it touches an ordinary muffin, there's actually enough gluten transferred there to be a problem for someone with celiac disease. So we have to be very careful that we keep food quite separate. Wheat, rye, barley, and ordinary oats can turn up in lots of unexpected foods. So these can turn up in things like stock cubes, dried herbs, mayonnaise, ketchup, and sauces. Check your food list for foods that are free from gluten ingredients and cross-contamination with gluten. You also need to get an annual checkup. So once you're diagnosed with celiac disease, you'll have seen your doctor. They will have checked things like your iron levels and your B vitamins and so on, and you'll see your dietitian. But this is a long-term disease, so it's important to get your annual checkup. People with celiac disease need to see their doctor and dietitian once a year. Some people will go back to the hospital. Some people, their GP will take care of them. Untreated celiac disease can lead to lots of complications like anemia and osteoporosis long term. So it's one of the reasons that you do need to be properly followed up and properly checked out when you're diagnosed. We know that if the celiac disease isn't properly treated, it can affect growth in children and teens as well. So it's really important for children and teens, as well as adults, to get checked up for their celiac disease once a year. There's blood tests that are recommended every year. So we recommend that people have their iron levels tested, along with their vitamin B12, vitamin D, folate, thyroid tests, and their celiac bloods, which you might see on your blood form as TTG. These help to tell us if your gut is healthy and if you're absorbing your nutrients as you should, and can let us know maybe if there's a little bit of gluten coming into the diet that we do need to deal with. Lots of people with celiac disease can continue to have gut problems even when they're on the gluten-free diet. And if that is you, do check in with your dietitian who'll be able to look and see if there's other issues. Some people with celiac disease do react to oats, even the gluten-free oats. There can be other issues around things like fiber. So very important just to get checked. And if you do have any issues, do get in touch with your dietitian. You can get in touch with us at the Coeliac Society at any time. Our email address is info@coeliac.ie, or you can follow us on Instagram at Coeliac Ireland. And if you want to book a dietitian appointment, you can do that with us at coeliac.ie.